Okay, so let's start with a little bit of review of Chapter 3. All right, so what's the definition of the law of demand? All right, so there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity of a good when you're buying it. What the hell does that mean? What does it mean in regular English? One will go up and one will go down. So in other words, when the price goes up, what happens?
Quantity demanded goes down.
We buy less, right? I mean, layman terms, regular people terms. The law of demand is if the price goes up, we buy less. Okay? That's the law of demand, which hopefully you guys all sort of agree with, right? So if we graph it, yes, it looks like that, okay? What's the definition of supply, the law of supply?
Supply has a direct relationship.
What has a direct relationship?
The price of the good, quantity of supply.
All right, the price and the quantity of the good have a direct relationship on the supply side. Because if you're selling the stuff, when the price goes up,
You want to sell more.
yeah, because you want to make more money, right? So, so the fact remains is that when you're buying it, you want it to be cheaper. When you're selling it, you want it to be more expensive, right? That's the basis of all economics. It's not deep. It's not scary. It's obvious, okay? The problem is that we tend to think that price drives supply and demand, and that's flat out wrong, okay? If, when you're thinking about economic consequences in this class, you immediately go to price first, I guarantee you, you have screwed it up, okay? If you start thinking price, you're going to be wrong, okay? And this is where being younger helps, because you haven't been buying crap as long as us old farts have. Old farts have been buying stuff forever. We always are thinking price, 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 because that's the way we were taught, okay? The younger you are, the more you're like, well, yeah, I buy stuff when I have the money, but I don't always have the money, and so I can't. And us old folks are like, well, I always have the money because I'm rich beyond my wildest dreams, and I'll just buy it whenever I feel like it. Okay, that's probably bullshit too, but whatever. All right. Anyways, supply and demand, basically it's just two graphs like that. Nothing complicated about it. No curves, no fanciness. I'm not even going to ask you about slope. You can talk about it if you want, but I don't care. This is what we work with. Now, when the price changes, the only thing that changes for us is the quantity. Demand does not change. Supply does not change when the price changes, okay? Don't say that. Again, you'll hear every politician say it. Poo-poo them when you hear it. The non-price determinants, those are the things that drive supply and demand, okay? And when we start putting supply and demand together, that's when we get price, okay? So, this is review. What is supply and demand? And what moves the supply and the demand curve, all right? Again, please remember, demand is what the buyers think. Supply is always what the sellers think, all right? So if there's a problem that asks you or says something along the lines of people who are buying this stuff think that blah is going to happen. Yep, they're talking demand. If you hear a seller thinks that blah, 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 you're talking about supply, okay? Because those are the two things that describe the buyers and the sellers. All right, so the new stuff is take these two lines and put them together. And what will happen when you put supply and demand together, graphically? They're going to intersect. And this is where sometimes this is going to happen to you in the back of your head, even though you don't expect it to. You're going to hear this magical gong in the back of your head. It's going to be like bong. And it's going to represent this magic intersection point. And the intersection point has a very special word in economics. This is equilibrium. Bong. It's a gong. I should have brought mine in. I don't really have one, sorry, but I should have borrowed one. And the equilibrium point is a point, which means that it's got two coordinates associated to it. It's got a price. So if you shoot this point straight across, this is the equilibrium price. We will mark the equilibrium price with a little capital E underneath it. That is the price that represents equilibrium. Okay? So likewise, if I go to the other coordinate down here, I will have a quantity, and it will have a subscript E that represents the equilibrium quantity. Now, this magic point, this gloriously magical point called equilibrium, it's just where supply and demand hit. All right? And what it means to be at equilibrium is to basically say that the quantity being demanded and the quantity being supplied at equilibrium are the same. Likewise, at equilibrium, the price that people want to sell at and people want to buy at are the same. Okay? Equilibrium is magic. How often do you think magic occurs in the real world? Not that often. Yeah, so unfortunately, equilibrium very rarely occurs in the real world. So if the price isn't at equilibrium, where does it have to be? Okay, so which one do you want it to be? Do you want it to be more or less? We're going to talk about both of them. So pick one to start with. More. Okay, so we've taken supply and demand and we've put them together, and we've created our equilibrium. And what equilibrium really is like a lodestone. Do you guys know what a lodestone is? Kind of like that, but basically it's like a magnet. What does a magnet do to metal? Tracks it, pulls it to you, okay? Equilibrium is like a magnet, and the actual price, that's the metal, okay? If the price is, say, up here, right? So let's suppose that I have another price. This M, I'm going to call it M because it stands for market price. If the market price is greater than the equilibrium price. Okay, I've written this out in its glorious words to start with. Being a mathematician, I will often just write this as the market price is greater than the equilibrium price. In other words, the price is too high. Okay? What happens when the price is too high in the market? The quantity goes down. Now, the question, though, is the quantity of what? The quantity demanded will go down. What about the quantity supplied? Well, let's see how that works. So, at the current market price, how much do we demand? There's no numbers up there, so you can't give me a number. Where do I go to find it, though? On the demand line, right? Please remember that demand is always driven by the demand line. I know that's deep, but that's the way it works. So at this price, here is how much we demand. How much do we supply? How much are suppliers supplying in the market at that price? Go to the supply line, and at that market price, this is how much is being supplied. So the key is realizing that the market price, all it does is it's setting a price to figure out how much is being supplied and how much is being demanded. At that price, where are we hitting demand and where are we hitting supply? And all I want to know is which one of those two numbers is bigger. Supply. Then the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. And what's happening when that occurs? When there's more supply than demand. You have extra. We have surplus. We have a surplus. And when stores are experiencing a surplus, what do? They gotta have a sale. In other words, they're going to lower the price. When the price is too high, what do you expect? It'll go down. And look where the price is going to move towards. Equilibrium. Okay? Again, now, realize nothing is changing in the market. The only thing that's going on right now is that currently the price is higher than equilibrium. Okay? There's nothing else is going on. Everything else is still ceteris paribus. Everything else is fixed. When that happens, there's a surplus going on. Because we're not going to buy all the stuff that the suppliers are trying to sell. That's just all there is to it. And what's going to happen after a surplus is that this will lead to a decrease in market price. That's the economic way of saying, folks, that the price is too high. Okay? We don't say that the price is too high. The price is never too high. Okay? The only thing that's going on in economics is we say, the price is at a point such that there is a surplus. All right? That's not necessarily too high, right? Because it could be that it's okay for sellers to have a surplus floating out there. They don't care, right? As long as it's profitable, more often than not, people don't give a crap. It's just that usually when you have a surplus, eventually what happens to your profit? Why? Right, but so what? As long as it's profitable at the selling part, why is the surplus a problem?
You're not selling your quantity.
Yeah, but so what? To keep it stored, right? If you don't sell everything you have in your market, right, you have to store it. Eventually, that's going to cost you money, right? I mean, you don't mind selling, suppose you're selling these iPhones, right? And you're selling them for $600 a pop. As long as, you may be making 1 million of these a year, but as long as you're making money off of every one of these, you keep saying, I'm going to sell them at $600 a pop. And if you've got a whole ton of them in your warehouse, big deal, right? If you're making $400 on each one of these that you produce, you're thinking, that's $400 that I make on each one of these I produce. As long as you still have room in your storehouse, you keep doing it. Who cares? You make 1 million, you only sell 200,000 or 300,000 of them, but you sell them at $600 a pop and you make money. Eventually, though, your warehouse fills up, and then what do you have to start doing? That's when you have to start lowering the price so that you can reduce your warehouse costs, okay? Now, that analysis, that's chapter 7 and 8, okay? We're going to get there, but for right now, all we're looking at is how does price get manipulated? The way price gets manipulated is compare quantities. If there's more supply than the demand, there's going to be a surplus. People are going to have to store their stuff. Eventually, that cuts into the profit margin towards equilibrium. Eventually, all right? And think about it in a gas station, right? Are gas companies, just because they're not selling all their gas, are they going to lower their price? No, because they know people are going to keep buying it, right? So they keep selling it, but until there's a point where they have too much, right? And their supplier comes in and charges them, X $1,000 every time they pull up and attach the hose, right? But if there's nothing to put in there because they haven't sold anything yet, that's when they got to start lowering the price. Maybe they cut their profit margin a little, but that's the way it works, right? Again, that's all driven by business at that stage, and it depends on how you have built your business. And all those things are extremely complicated, and I don't want to get into them because that's way beyond where we want to go. All I want to say is when the price is too high, there's a surplus. And eventually, we'll expect the price to go down so that they can remove the surplus. Okay? Don't make it more complicated. That's one of the problems with this class is that we want to make it complicated, and I don't want you to. I want you to make it easy. And so the easy thing to do is to just say, hey, when the price is too high, when the price is above equilibrium, there's a surplus, it's going to drop. Okay, so now let's flip the coin. What happens when the price is too low? So you guys, my advice to you is, screw it. Let's make a whole new graph. Just keep it easy. Make sure you mark supply and demand correctly. It'll make your life tons easier if you get into the habit of it. Okay, here is our equilibrium. Remember that this sets an equilibrium price and an equilibrium quantity, which stayed the same. All right, so now we're going to set the price too low. What happens when the market price is too low? All right, so when, that's a W, I swear, market price is less than equilibrium price. And again, this is the mathy way of writing it. It's a lot shorter. But again, do the same analysis. At this price, what's the quantity being demanded? What's the quantity being supplied? All right, so here is the quantity that these people are going to demand at that price, because that's where this price intersects that demand line. Here's where this price intersects the supply line. So here we will say that the quantity supplied is less than the quantity demanded. And note that I'm not saying that supply is less than demand, okay? Saying that supply is less than demand makes no sense whatsoever. That's like saying I have $1 less than 2 hours. Supply and demand aren't comparable. Quantities, on the other hand, are. Prices are. But supply and demand itself, they're totally different things, right? Because one of them are buyers, one of them are sellers. These two people are not the same thing, okay? They can be, but let's not go down that road. All right, so when the quantity supplied is less than the quantity demanded, what's going on? You don't have enough? The opposite of a surplus? Shortage. What happens when there is a shortage? So again, imagine, if you will, you're running a grocery store and you're selling sugar. You're selling sugar at 50 cents, a pound. You put all of your sugar bags out on the counter. You set the price at 50 cents a pound. First day, what happens when you sell sugar at 50 cents a pound? Gone. Somebody comes into the store, they need a pound of sugar, they see that it's 50 cents, what do? They buy way the hell more than one, right? They're thinking, how big are my cupboards? Yeah, I got about 10 pounds of space, right? They throw 10 pounds of sugar in their cart and they move happily along, right? Now, do you restock your shelves every hour on the hour? No, so what happens?
There's none on your shelves.
There's none on your shelves. People show up to buy sugar, what happens? They can't buy sugar. So what do you do the next time you put sugar out on the shelf?
There's the price.
Anytime you go to the shelves to restock your shelves and the items are empty, price goes up, right? And it doesn't matter what you're selling, folks, right? You could be selling liquor at the liquor store or at the bar, right? Imagine if you run a bar and you're selling, selling stuff, right? And somebody goes along and says, okay, I'm going to sell Jack Daniels for 5 shots for $1. Okay? Normally it's, $5 a shot. What happens when people want Jack Daniels? Do they go to the store and buy a bottle of Jack Daniels? Not at those for bar, and they'll say, I'll have 5 shots. They put $1 down, and then they slip out a flask. Pour it in there. Right? Because if you go to the liquor store next door, how much does a bottle of Jack Daniels cost you? $40, right? I mean, so, but if the bar is making money off of that deal, should they keep doing it? I mean, they're making money, right? Suppose they made, 2 cents for each one of those shots they sold. They're making money. They could keep doing this forever. They could make more money by raising the price. If a business can make more money, what do? They do it. Okay, again, remember, this is the asshole phase of the class. Anytime you make more money, you do it, no matter what the consequences are, because you don't care, right? Remember, people are not people, they're FTEs. They're 3-letter acronyms. You don't even call them people, because then you treat them like people, and that's wrong. You need to treat them like a monetary figure. People are money that is coming out of your pocket. You hate that. Right? Okay? So, I mean, it's sometimes a brutal world. Welcome to it. All right? So, there is a shortage. The price, the market price, will rise soon. Again, where does the market price move towards? Equilibrium. And hence my terminology that equilibrium price is like a magnet or a lodestone. A lodestone, if you don't know, is a stone that leads you to a specific load, right? It's supposed to be a stone you can use to indicate veins of ore in the earth. It's sort of like wizard speak. That's the idea, though, okay? That equilibrium is really just an attractor. Whenever the price, you know where it's going. Okay? And this is why price goes up and down. Price does not go up and down for any other reason than these two things. Surplus or shortage. That's what makes the price change. Before you say the price has ever changed, you had better have said one of these two things, because those are the only two things that make it change. All right? All right. So, with that in mind, let's actually start trying to analyze these markets. So, assume we are studying. What market do you guys want to analyze? What do you guys want to run? Wise move. The corn market. All right. So the corn market, let's assume that it is close to equilibrium, okay? It's not at equilibrium because that just almost never happens. But let's assume that we are near equilibrium, very, very, very close to this equilibrium price, okay? So we are near equilibrium. And now I'm going to release ceteris paribus and let something else change, all right? So imagine, if you will, that we had ceteris paribus on, and the price was maybe either too high or too low, and then it shifted until it got fairly close to equilibrium, all right? Now, I'm going to release ceteris paribus, and let's let something change, all right? So, you read this. So the standard question to ask is, okay, so here's an economic event, and the economic event is that incomes are on the rise. They're up by 5%. I want to know what's going to happen to the price of corn and the quantity of corn being bought and sold. In other words, tell me what happens to equilibrium when this change occurs. Okay, so right now we are sitting somewhere, kicks and giggles. Let's set a price. Okay, let's suppose that the equilibrium price is actually, $4 a bushel, which is roughly close right about now for corn. All right, and the quantity, let's suppose of the market is something like 20 billion bushels. So out in the whole world, there's about 20 billion bushels of corn being bought and sold at somewhere around $4 a bushel. It's happening everywhere, right? It's happening in Russia, it's happening in the U.S., it's happening in Australia, it's happening in Canada, etc. Okay? All over the world. And now you read, incomes in the world rise by 5%. All right, that's an economic event. We released ceteris paribus, okay? Your job when ceteris paribus is released is to say, where did that change happen? And the where is one of your 10 non-price determinants of demand or supply. Why is it demand? Because the third non-price determinant of demand is income. When I say that incomes change, this is going to drive demand. Now, is this going to make demand increase or decrease? Why? Why will demand increase? All right, very good. So, our response to this is, corn is a normal good. So, an increase in income will increase demand. Again, the only things that increase or decrease supply or demand are the release of ceteris paribus, and we just have to figure out when something changes, where does it fit? Now, when demand goes up, what happens in the market? Think about it from just a regular old buying and selling perspective. Right? If people are demanding more corn, is there going to be a shortage of corn or a surplus of corn? Okay, so that's your next step. This is step one. Step two is, due to increased demand, a shortage of corn starts. So changes in supply and demand lead to one of two things. You got a 50-50 shot of guessing it correctly if you don't know. Surplus or shortage. That's it. All right? And it's as simple as thinking about what the change was. If there's more demand, if people are buying more of the stuff, there's going to be a shortage. Blammo. What always follows a shortage? prices start to rise due to shortage. Okay, so we have half of what we were looking for, right? We wanted to know what was happening to price and quantity. We have the price side of it. Now we just have to do the quantity side of it. And here's where you got to be a little bit careful, because normally when people tell you that the price went up,
You would think the quantity was down or went down.
you would think that the quantity would go down, right? Because we, as human beings, are more likely to be buyers than sellers. And whenever we hear the price went up, we think, well, we're going to buy less. That's unfortunately wrong in this situation. Why is that? Well, the reason why is that when you analyze what happens to quantity, you look at things from the opposite perspective of number one. So up here we talked about demand. So what's the opposite of demand? Supply. When the price goes up, what do suppliers do? They make more. Because they're going to make more money, right? Quantity will increase. And if you think about it, right, if people are demanding more corn because they're making more money, what? You got to grow more. So if they can, right? They always can. Because they'll just stop growing soybeans and they'll grow corn instead, right? Or they'll cut down more trees and convert it into corn land, which is what's happening in Wisconsin, right? I mean, if you look at a lot of the farms as you're driving through Wisconsin, you'll see a lot of clear cutting going on. Why? Because corn prices are extremely high right now. It's worth it to them to cut down an extra 200 or 300 yards or 2 or 300 acres worth of trees that are maybe on not so good land, but as long as they can grow corn on it and get at least a reasonable amount of it off of it, you do it at $4 to $5 a bushel. That's money, folks. That's right, man. Come on. All right, but these 4 steps are the same 4 steps you will always follow when to tell me what's going to happen to price and quantity. Okay? The 4 steps are always the same. Now, what happens in the 4 steps changes, but the 4 steps always work this way. Step 1 is what happens to supply or demand, right? So you take your economic event, you put it into one of your non-price determinants. Wherever it fits, put it there. So one of 4 answers are possible. Either supply goes up or supply goes down, or demand goes up or demand goes down. Really, you've got a 25% chance of guessing right. Hopefully you will know, though. After that, due to an increase, decrease of whichever one, there will be either a shortage or a surplus. That's always step 2. After a shortage or surplus, you had better not miss number 3 ever. Okay? What always follows a shortage?
Prices rise.
Price goes up. What always follows a surplus?
Sale.
Price goes down. That always happens. Period. Okay? Period. So do not ever tell me that there is a shortage and then the price went down. That does not happen in the real world ever, unless there's lots of other things changing. Okay? And remember, for our world, I'm only letting one thing change. Right? And then your last step, this is the one that's mildly tricky, is that you, based on the change in price, you analyze quantity in the opposite method. Right? So if we change demand up here, we look at it from a supply perspective here. When the price goes up, suppliers go, yay, and they make more. Okay? Now, those are the words. These are okay. I like them. But it's way too much for me. Let me show you the way the graph tells me how to do this. An increase in demand. How do I graph an increase in demand?
Shift to the right.
Shift the line to the right. Take your line and push it to the right. Here is my new demand line. Put a dot where your new demand line hits the supply curve, because the supply curve didn't shift. Supply did not change in this instance. Compare this equilibrium to that equilibrium. What happened to the price from here to here?
An increase.
It increased. What did we say?
No, it starts to rise.
From this spot to this spot, what happened to quantity?
Went
Went up, right? Because we moved to the right, we moved up. So quantity went up. What did we say? Quantity went up. The graph will always tell you the exact same things. And all you have to do graphically is compare where these 2 points are. That's it. So all of this, making sure you understand it verbally, this simplifies it in my mathematical world, okay? I tend to be a bit more mathy, so I tend to do this first and then write the words. If you like the words and would rather go back to the graph afterwards, that's cool. Just again, make sure that your words and your graph say the same thing. And you're all good. All right, so let's try another case. So we're going to stick with the corn market. And let's stay with us somewhere near equilibrium. All right, and let's suppose the economic event that happens this time. So here's our release of ceteris paribus, and I say government needs to balance the budget, so corn gets a new 10% tax levied on it. So, 10% tax, right? Because, Paul Ryan in his infinite wisdom said we need to balance the budget, and he's decided that the way we're going to do it is by taxing corn growers. Of course, he would never say this because there's too many corn growers in Wisconsin, but in theory, that's what he may do, right? We need to balance the budget. Why not? Okay? Now, when you hear that there's a new tax, what do you think in your brain? Not yet. Normally, when you hear somebody is getting a new tax on something, what do you think is going to happen to that product? You think demand is going to go down because the price went up, right? When you hear something is getting taxed, your first instinct is the price is going to go up, so demand is going to fall. And that's what a lot of politicians will say. That's why we don't raise taxes, because it will reduce demand. True, to some degree. But the fact remains is that that is one of the worst statements you could possibly say, because now you guys know, when you hear that there is a new tax, you realize that who is paying the tax? Not buyers, sellers, right? Sellers are the only ones who pay taxes. Sales taxes are paid by sellers, right? We feel like we're paying it, but we're not, okay? So, our first response then is, due to a new tax, what happens to supply? Right? Because sellers, growers of corn, they now have to take some of their money, and instead of buying corn seed or land or tractors or gas, right, they have to pay it to the government, right? Damn government. So step one, tell me what happens to supply or demand. In this case, it's a new tax. Supply goes down. Step two, shortage or surplus. Now, again, this one's a little bit trickier, but think about it from this perspective. Suppliers are making less. Shortage, right? There's less supply. There's less of it available. Shortage. You will learn to dream up lots of new synonyms for the word starts, or begins, or ensues, or processes or whatever. Yeah, exactly. Because you got to say these over and over and over again. You're going to do this like dozens of times. And if you use the same word over and over again, your eyes get a little buggy. Okay. What always follows a shortage? Price increases because there's a shortage. Price rises always follow shortages, period. As soon as you say shortage, the next thing is always price goes up, period. Okay? And that's what you were expecting, right? Because when there's a new tax on it, what do you expect to happen to the price? You expect it to go up. This is why, folks. Because suppliers cut their supply, and then the price is going to rise almost naturally. All right? Now, what did we start with? So what do we switch to down here? When the price goes up, what does demand do? Again, remember we're buyers. When the price goes up, what do buyers do? Quantity goes down. We buy less. So that's what happens to quantity, right? So quantity will fall. Essentially, de-escalate. That's a good one. I'll use that. All right, so let's see if the graph can verify that. All right? Now, again, think about it in terms of this first step. When supply falls, what's going to happen to the quantity if growers aren't growing as much? It's going to go down, all right? You're not going to have as much. That's why quantity has to go down. Okay, so anyways, first step, supply falls. So graphically, what do I do to supply? Shift it left. Again, think left and right, not up and down, folks, right? Because this is a shift in, this is supply falling. Notice what it looks like if you go up and down. It looks like it went up. Left and right, okay? So supply shifted left. And your job is to compare the 2 points. Here's one point. Here's the old point. What happened to the price? The price went up. That's what we... What happened to the quantity? Yeah, note the quantity was here, now it shifted to over here. That's quantity falling, okay? So this graph will always validate these words, always. And if they don't, then you did something wrong, okay? All right. Not bad? What's confusing you about it?
Well, does it now mean that demand is going to go up because the price went up?
We don't look beyond this step. That's it. This is as far as we go. We look at one step. Again, this is where I have to ask you to take the real world and suspend it for a little while. Because all I want to know is what's going to happen from this one step. What's the first thing that happens? The first thing that happens when a new tax is levied is that supply falls. And when supply falls, the price starts to go up and the quantity starts to go down. And then that's it. For all intents and purposes, in this class, you're done. In the real world, tons more crap is going on. But there's always tons more crap going on, and there's no way I could try and limit those down to something that we could analyze so that this is what's going to happen in 6 months. Oh, God, it looks like hell. I mean, the real graphs that economists work with in the real world are, they're much worse than this. I just want you to get 3 lines. That's it. All right, so try not to think beyond this, and that's tough, right? I mean, because we're used to seeing further.
I don't want to hope this is not getting way off the point, but
okay.
I know you don't like political speak per se.
I'm okay with politics.
The Sunday shows the phrase jumpstart the economy.
Oh, that's macroeconomy, and we'll get to that. Jumpstarting the economy is the macro side of things, and we'll get there. That's chapters 11, 12, 13, and 14. You'll love it too, because I'm going to try to avoid politics here on the micro side of the world, and the macro side, the second half of this class, that's when we'll scream at each other a little bit. But so for now, don't worry about it. That's all I'm going to ask.
Well, the debate has been,
More spending, right. Yep. And we'll talk about the difference between those two when we get there. Spending versus taxes on a macro level. All right, so let's try a couple more examples just to be safe. Okay. So you read this event in some, science magazine that there's a new invention out there that's going to make corn grow 20% more volume per kernel than it was before. All right? Everything else is going to stay the same, but there's going to be more production due to this new invention. All right, so good. New invention. That is technology. Anytime you get new technology, folks, new tech equals increase in supply. Period. Hopefully. Even if it's one watch. Because there were none before, in theory. So, what follows an increase in supply? Right, there's more being made. Surplus begins. More supply, more supply, more stuff out there. Surplus. What always follows a surplus? Price starts to fall, because that's what always follows a surplus. The silos out there are getting too full. We can't store it anymore. We started with supply. Look at it from the demand perspective. When the price falls, what the demanders do? We buy more. The quantity that is going to be bought and sold will increase. This quantity really represents both buy and sell, okay? So let's make sure that the picture agrees with our words. Increase in supply. Shift supply to the right. Compare our new equilibrium to our old equilibrium. What happened to the price from here to here? Price went down. What happened to the quantity from here to here? It shifted to the right. There's more. So price falling, quantity increasing. Again, the words and the pictures should always follow hand in hand, okay? And I want you to be able to do both, because I'm going to ask you to do both, so be ready. All right? Because these graphs will get more complicated in chapters, 4, 5, 6, 7, okay? This is just the straightforward, get it down type of feel to start with. Yes. The graphs will be on the quiz, so be ready. Okay? All right, so one more. So let's see. So let's suppose that. So you hear that the price of soybeans, a substitute for corn, falls. Please note that on quizzes and tests, I will tell you whether or not a good is a substitute or a complement, okay? On a quiz, I'm always going to tell you which one it is, okay? On homeworks, you can tell me. On quizzes, I'm going to dictate one or the other, okay? Just so that we don't run into the problems on a quiz of having lots of multiple different answers, okay? So I am going to tell you whether or not two goods are substitutes or complements. I'll always tell you, all right? So in this case, the price of soybeans is a substitute for corn, whether it is or not. Assume it is. What follows? All right, so again, you look at the change. The price change of a substitute. Substitute's price change is over here on the demand side. So demand is changing. Is demand going up or down? Demand will fall because the substitute is cheaper. Therefore, we will buy the substitute. We will buy less corn. So here, our first step is demand falls. My advice to you when you are doing these sorts of things, just so that you keep them straight, never hurts to say what's happening graphically because of these things, okay? So when you say that something falls, tell me that it shifts left. When you say something rises, tell me that it shifts to the right. So again, it's a verbal reaffirming of what you're going to do graphically in a minute. All right, so let's do the graph first, right? The price of soybeans is falling. I need to shift demand to the left. What happened to the price? Here is our new equilibrium. Here is our old equilibrium. Price went down. So technically, we can go right to number 3. What always makes the price fall? You can go back and forth. Those two go either direction, right? And then last but not least, what happens to quantity? Yep. Quantity falls. And technically, since we started with demand, we're looking at it from the supply side. When the price goes down, suppliers say, crap, I'm going to produce less. Or you can think of it as we're moving to a lower quantity. All right? So those are the words and the graphs that describe changes in supply or demand, allowing one thing to change in ceteris paribus, nothing else. Okay? And technically, because of these 4 examples, you now know the answer to every supply and demand change question that I could ask. Because the first step, right, step 1, what are the 4 different? Demand goes up or down, supply goes up or down. What follows each one of those things is always the same, right? If the demand goes up because of income, is it any different than if the demand goes up because of advertising? No. Nothing whatsoever. So technically, because I've done an example of each one, you now have the answer to every supply and demand question I could possibly ask. All you got to do is not screw up step 1.
Again, but okay, I was watching a special and they were talking about popcorn.
Okay.
Small was $3.50 and a large was $7, and they were selling equal amounts. So they invented a decoy of a medium at $6.50. So when people saw the $6.50, they were 50 cents. They get the large. They never sold any more smalls. They never sold any more mediums. So advertising can affect.
Well, sure. Advertising affects demand. Yes, I agree. And stupidity affects it as well. Unfortunately, stupidity and advertising tend to go hand in hand. All right. The fact that we are not very good at fractions and math is another reason that advertising works so well on us. right? Good or bad, I don't know. Just points out that that's why they spend money on that kind of stuff. It's why they have a small, a medium, and a large, because we can't figure out which one's a better deal, so we'll just buy whichever one we think is a better deal, and their job is to make sure that the one that they make the most money on is the one that you think is the best deal. Has nothing to do with whether it really is or not. Thinking. We're not always so good at it. All right, so these are our steps for how does supply and demand change, and how do those changes lead to price and quantity changes. All right? All right, so let's see. Suppose we're studying the peaches market. And you hear that peach pickers form a union and get a 20% raise. Very good. Please, 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 please. Remember what resources are. Resources are land, labor, and capital. When I tell you the price of land goes up, almost always land is a resource, okay? Period. So when land prices go up, almost always what I'm talking about is decreasing. The other thing, of course, is remember that when labor costs more, supply does not go up, okay? People like to think that, well, when you pay people more, what are they going to do? They're going to work harder, right? And they're going to get more done. So they're going to produce more. Paying people more does not make them produce more. Paying people more means that they are less likely to quit. That is all that higher wages do, folks. That's it. They do not make you produce more. In fact, they tend to make you produce less because there will be less of you, right? When labor costs more, you hire less people, right? So in this case, what you should expect to happen is that supply falls, and due to supply falling, we move to a new equilibrium at a higher price and less quantity of peaches being bought and sold. Okay? Very classic type of example. All right? And again, the same thing went with that tax example. A lot of people think when you hear a new tax is being levied on a product, your first instinct is the price of demand is falling. Do not go down that road. You now know where to look. Fit things in here first, and then go back and do your analysis on supply or demand. All right. That is essentially the end of Chapter 3 and the very first few pages of Chapter 4. They really are, I don't know why they broke the chapter in two, but this is really where I would have naturally made the break myself. But for whatever reason, I just wanted to make sure we got through that piece of it today. All right, now. Market supply, market demand. All right. So, how do we stop this from happening? How can we trick supply and demand? So imagine, if you will, it's 1940s, and you live in New York City. New York City, if you guys don't know, is an island, right? So that means there's a very, very, very finite amount of space. So if there's lots of people moving to New York because that's where the New York Stock Exchange is, that's where Broadway is, and if you are an aspiring actor, actress, or stockbroker, that's where you want to move, be where the action is. So lots of people are moving to New York. What's happening to the price of an apartment if lots of people move to New York? Going up. All right. In 1940s, in order to rent a two-bedroom apartment in New York City, it cost you around $1,500 a month. Roughly, right? That was a very small two-bedroom apartment, mind you. All right, $1,500, 1940s. Okay. Think about $1,500 for a two-bedroom apartment. Now, what are you thinking? Yeah, I mean, nowadays prices of apartments in New York City would be like $3,000 or $4,000 a month to rent a two-bedroom apartment. Well, how can people afford to live in New York City if rent is that high? Right? So what do we got to do? Well, we can't build more places. We're on an island. Well, we tried to go up, but it costs too much. Nobody's willing to buy them. They did it first, right? They started building them up, but they figured out that they could only go so high up, and then they couldn't go any higher up. So what did we do? What did the mayor of New York City do? He raised the income? Rent stabilization. He said, screw supply and demand. I'm going to put out rent control instead. Instead of raising minimum wage, he said, I'm going to control rent instead. Right? Because if you tell businesses that they have to pay their employees more, what did the businesses do? Yeah, they're like, see you the hell later. There's no way I'm going to open up a shop in New York City because I got to pay my workers $10 an hour instead of $4.50. All right? So instead, the mayor of New York City said, look, these people that are having to live in New York City and making potentially minimum wage, they need a place that's affordable to live. Let's just force the rent to be like $700 a month. Right? I mean, great thing to do. They'll be able to afford housing in New York City, and they won't have to take a 3-hour subway ride from, the far west or the far south of New York City to get into the city and actually do their jobs, right? So, rent control. Rent control. They put a price ceiling on rent in New York City. The mayor, he sold this to the populace, right? He said, look, you people that are out there trying to live in New York City, you can't afford a place to live, or there's like 8 of you all living in the same apartment in order for you to afford it, because that's about what you had to do in order to afford an apartment in New York City, was have 8 people pitching into the rent in order to make it. You've even seen some shows that's what they try and point out, right? So here was his way of trying to do it, right? So let's look at this from a supply and demand perspective. Here was supply, here was demand. The equilibrium price of rent was $1,500 a month. Mayor of New York City said, nope, we're not going to do it. We're going to put a price ceiling, and for simplicity, let's just say it was $800. That became the maximum price. Now, let's analyze this price that this mayor in his infinite wisdom decided to create. How much supply is there at $800 a month rent in New York City? Here's our supply. What's happening to demand? Here's our demand. Okay, so the 2 things that are happening. One, let's look at it from the demand side first. Rent is only $800 a month. I'm an actor. I was living in Pennsylvania. Say I was living in Pittsburgh, or I was living in Philadelphia, or maybe I was living out in Washington, D.C., or maybe even like Cincinnati or something like that, right? I'm a decent distance from New York City, and I'm thinking the main reason I'm not moving to New York City is that's what rent is, right? I mean, I know I'm not going to go be a star right away if I move to New York City. But I'm a decent actor here in Cincinnati. I'm playing all the major, shows in Cincinnati, whatever that is. You're making decent money. But now you see that rent in New York City is only $800 a month. What do? Hell yeah. Your big chance, right? I can probably go there, work a minimum wage job, waiting tables, asking how many fries you want with that, until I can make it in New York City, right? So you move to New York City. You and all of your friends from Cincinnati and Cleveland and Philadelphia and everywhere else. So you go there, you go to New York City, and you start looking in the rental ads, right? And how many ads are there for rental available in New York City?
Not a lot.
None. Or the ones that do have an ad, what do they say happens when you show up? I just rented it, or you're 353rd on the waiting list. We'll let you know when your name shows up. All right? So the problem from a demand perspective is more demand, more quantity demanded due to lower price. So, long wait lists. So once you get out there into New York City and you discover that you can't find a place to live, but maybe you've already nailed down a waitress job or a waiter job, and you're doing okay. You think you're surviving. You're making decent money because you're young, and so when you're young you can shake what you got and you get good tips, right? So that doesn't work. All right. So what do you do in order to live in New York City? You're back to the huddle up thing. Unfortunately, though, what had to come along with all of this rent control business? Limits the number of single families allowed in any one rental, right? There can't be any more than 2 non-related people in a particular apartment anymore, right? Because they don't want this $800 rent and having 8 people shoved inside of there anymore, because that was bad, right? That was bad for rentals. So the rentals were saying, great, we'll allow you to charge us $800 a month, but there's no more of this multifamily dwelling crap. So, but you don't want it. You don't know how to use the subway system yet. You don't want a 2-hour commute for your working at 6 in the morning waitress job. So, what are you going to do? Right. Well, first, you start by trying to work in a motel and pay the $1,500 a month that the hotel is charging, except it's probably more than $1,500 a month in a hotel, right? Nightly rental, one night stay at a motel is probably like $200 or $300 in. So a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks, you live in a hotel or a motel, but eventually what happens? You're out on the street, you got any money. So what are you going to do? I mean, what happens when you don't have a place to live? You go to homeless shelters, you live in the park, or you break the law, right? You hook up with someone who does have an apartment and you say, can I stay? Yeah, exactly. I'll give you $100 a month if you let me sleep on your couch, but let's not have it be a real arrangement. And, oh, by the way, I don't live here. I'm just hanging out in this apartment with you, and I'm just visiting, right? Because it's okay to have visitors in your apartment. They just can't live there, right? But the fact remains is that a black market ensues. People start breaking the law, all right? I mean, it's a silly law anyways, if you think about it, right? I mean, come on. He's forcing the price to be $800 a month. Yeah, okay, I'll split it with somebody for $400, and we just have to be shh. All right, so long waits, black market. All right, now let's look at it from the supply side. What are the suppliers, the people who are renting apartments? What do they say? They were charging $1,500 a month for rent. Now they only get to charge $800 a month for rent. You own the apartment building, right? You used to be getting $1,500 per month from each apartment. Now you only get $800. When it comes time for repairs, what do you do as an apartment owner? Yeah, why bother, right? I mean, if you have a nice apartment, are you going to get more money for it? No. If your apartment's a piece of crap, are you going to get less money for it? Why bother, right? Why bother fixing up your apartments that you're renting? Because you can only get $800 for them. So if they're rat-infested places and people are desperate because quantity demanded is way high, you go into an apartment to look at it and, you know, it's $800, but you see the rat move across and the cockroach waves at you while he's sitting down there. I mean, what do you say when the guy says, "You want it?" I got nowhere else to go, right? So, quality deteriorates to price level. You're going to pay $800 a month for your apartment, you're going to get an $800 a month apartment. You get what you pay for. Right? If the toilet backs up, whose problem is it? Yours. If the lights aren't working, whose problem is it? If the stairs don't, if there's a big missing stair that you could maybe step through and fall through and break your neck, whose problem is it? Right? There was no OSHA floating around at that stage, folks. OSHA couldn't do anything. And that was another reason that the rental people said we'd take $800. They said that there better not be any more standards on our apartments because at $800 a month, we can't afford to keep it up. Right? So quality goes down the crapper. Now, so the quality really starts to stink, right? So you rent this apartment, there's rats living in it, there's cockroaches all over the place. You constantly have the toilet backing up. I mean, what are you eventually going to do as a renter? You hope you can move, but there's no other place that's available, so you're stuck there. What are you going to do eventually, right?
Fix it up.
You're going to either fix it up yourself, or would you complain to management? You'd try, but management would laugh at you and go, "This is a rent-controlled apartment, go to hell." Right? So who might you complain to then? City government, Better Business Bureau, right? I mean, there's got to be some standards on this apartment, right? I mean, suppose there's raw sewage on the floor, and, you're like, "Look, guy, I can't fix the entire pipe system in this apartment. There's refuse." So you go to the government and you complain, right? So what does the government do to the apartment owner? What does the apartment owner do after you complain? Evicts you, right? Because what happens as soon as he evicts you? He's got a 500-person wait list sitting behind him, right? I mean, you're out the door as fast as you can be. Complaints equal eviction. In addition, think about the number of people who own apartments in New York. I mean, how many of them are there going to be? 100, maybe 1,000 tops, right? If somebody complains about one of the apartments in one of the owner's dwellings, what does he do with all the buddies who rent apartments in the same area? That's right. Your name goes on a list. Amen. Anybody who complained back in the 40s in New York, they were living in Jersey whether they liked it or not. Because there was nobody in New York who owned an apartment building who would rent you an apartment ever again. So here's what happens when you try and trick supply and demand. Works great, doesn't it? I mean, all of these people in New York have these really cheap living expenses now, right? And so that's what a lot of suppliers were doing, is they said, "Oh, I can only get $800 per apartment, so instead of having an 800 square foot apartment, what did they start doing? 2 400 square foot apartments. It's 2 bedrooms, 400 square feet. There's 2 beds that face each other on one wall. That's it, right? That's a 2-bedroom apartment in New York City. I mean, the problem was that by forcing the price to be lower, he forced a surplus to exist, right? Or a shortage to exist because demand outweighed supply tenfold. So it was a nice idea. It even sounded like a good idea. What's the end result, though? Unintended consequences, right? Trying to trick supply and demand just doesn't work, okay? You can try. These are the results, right? I mean, rent was cheaper. And you guys ever heard what happened is that when the rent control came out, instead of the people who were paying $1,500 a month in rent, you know what they did? They just rented 2 apartments. And they had an extra apartment that no one lived in, and they would just give it to their friends like once a week out of the year. It became a timeshare. I mean, that's the way I went to New York City the first time ever in my life. I went to a rental-controlled apartment building where they paid like rent it, and they were just like, oh, anytime you're a friend of a friend, great, here's an apartment, you can go stay in it for a week because it's so cheap, I don't even notice, right? So that the amount of supply available actually fell because people would just rent 2 instead of 1 because it was basically double the price anyways. And they're like, if you're a wealthy person, does the difference between $1,500 and $800 make a difference to you? Hell no, so rent 2. Why not? All the rich people's names are on the rent control apartment list all over the place for any of them that are still out there. There's like about 4 or 5 major building contractors who still have rent control apartments in New York City. You can still find them. Right? By law, they have to, unless they upgrade the building, they have to stay rent controlled. That's how they actually turned it off, was they said, oh, if you upgrade your building, we will remove all the rent controls on your building. That was their way of trying to force apartment owners to go back to, 1, fixing up their buildings, and 2, being able to charge a reasonable price for rent. But that's one classic side of it, right? That's this is trying to help the buyer, right? So if it's too high of a price, force the price to be lower. So wouldn't it be nice if the government stepped in and forced the price of gas to be $1 a gallon?
No.
Folks, guess what would happen in the gas market? Very similar type of thing, right? If people know that the price should be higher, what they'll do? Buy and hoard, period, right? You will start having people who buy gas and drive home and pour it in a container and go back to the gas station. So don't ask the government to lower gas prices, folks. Let the market take care of it. All right, now, what's the other side of a price ceiling?
Price floor.
Price floor. Why do we have price floors? Who are we trying to save when we create a price floor? Sellers, right? Does anybody know of a price floor that currently exists in the market today? In fact, in Wisconsin?
I know that with gas, you can't set your prices too far lower.
That's a monopoly problem, actually. We'll get to that in chapter 19. But there is a price floor in Wisconsin right now, folks. It's for milk prices. Milk prices are currently have a floor set on them by the state of Wisconsin. If you are a person who has a milk factory or you are growing cows or what have you, and you produce milk, you can, if you want, sell your milk to the state of Wisconsin at a guaranteed price. So why do you think the state of Wisconsin did that? Why did we do it? Good question. So the key here was that the price of milk in stores was $1 a gallon. But unfortunately for the small farmers of Wisconsin, in order to make a profit, they needed the price of milk to be $1.25 a gallon. Right? I mean, think about growing, say, 50 or 60 head, and then you take them in and milk them and say you maybe do it by hand or whatever. You have maybe a couple of machines that assist you, but not the really big factory ones where, it's like a big, huge turbine and the cow doesn't even know what the hell is going on. It's like, and all of a sudden there's milk everywhere, right? I mean, but you're a small Wisconsin farmer. In order for you to make a reasonable profit on your milk, you need to have the price of milk $5 a gallon. And during the 80s, 90s, prices of milk plummeted. They plummeted down to about $1 a gallon. And what happened was that the Wisconsin dairy farmers, the small Wisconsin dairy farmers who have a lobby that go out to the state Capitol every couple of weeks and talk to our senators and congressmen and say, hey, milk farmers in Wisconsin are going broke. They can't afford to be small farmers anymore. What are you going to do about it to help us? The state of Wisconsin said, great. You know what we'll do? We'll make a price floor. And they negotiated, right? This was back when Wisconsin had a little bit more power in some of the committees in the national government. We said, look, we will guarantee that state of Wisconsin, if you can't sell your milk for more than $1.25 a gallon to a store or a shop or wherever, we will buy it as long as you freeze dry it and make it transportable. All right? And the state of Wisconsin actually had a deal with the U.S. government to essentially, pay for half of this subsidy. Right? The U.S. government gave the state of Wisconsin a little bit to cover this. But the fact remains that Wisconsin will buy milk at $1.25 a gallon if you can't sell it for more. So we were here trying to save the small Wisconsin farmer. Sounds like a great idea, right? I mean, keep our dairy farmers working, right? Because what are they going to do if they go broke? They won't be able to make milk anymore. And what happens if a whole bunch of dairy farmers go broke? There will be a shortage of milk. And what's going to happen to milk prices? They're going to go up. And we don't want milk prices to go... Wait. Well, anyways, the fact remains that we want to keep our milk farmers working, right? We don't want them to go broke. We don't want there to be just one big, huge milk farmer. So let's instead guarantee that our small farmers make a profit. Imagine, if you will, you were voting on a referendum that the state of Wisconsin put out that said you would do this, right? We raised taxes on individuals. State income taxes went up by like 0.2% because of this. Would you guys vote for that? Would you guys vote to save small dairy farmers? Sounds like a great idea, right? I mean, I don't know any of them, but sounds good, so I'd do it. Now, what are the consequences? So at $1.25 a gallon, what's going on? Demand is low, and supply is high at $1.25. So we're basically forcing a surplus. And that surplus, of course, is going to the state of Wisconsin. Right? Okay. So what's happening to people who are buying milk, though? I mean, they're still going to the store and paying $1 a gallon, right? No. What happened to milk prices? They went up to basically $1.25, right? I mean, because the buyers of milk who would like to sell milk at $1 a gallon, that's only if they can buy it from the suppliers at $1 a gallon, right? So whatever the price of milk was, as soon as this price floor went in, what happened to prices? So not only did we agree to pay tax to buy this milk, what else did we agree at the same time?
To pay more for milk.
We agreed to pay more for milk, period. The price of milk went up to $1.25 a gallon almost instantly. Took about 2 days. But we're saving the small farmer, right? So it's okay. We're okay. We're getting shot from the left and the right, but we're still okay with it. It's no problem. All right? So from the demand side, right, saving farmers, so okay. What about the supply side? We're creating a surplus. We're keeping those small farmers alive. Now, are there any large farmers in Wisconsin? Probably. I mean, you would assume there are some consortiums of large farmers, right? What are they doing when they see the prices go up to $1.25? Well, I mean, they're making more money, right? So are they going to try and, reduce their supply at all?
No, they're making more.
No, in fact, they're cranking it out as fast as they can. They used to be selling at $1 a gallon. They still were making money. Now they're making $1.25 a gallon because if the stores won't buy it, they always know the state of Wisconsin will. So what do the large farmers do? Large farmers raise quantity supplied, raise quantity even more. And before, they would have to take a profit hit on that extra guaranteed a price for it, right? So normally you think, well, when the supply increases, the price has to go down. Can the price go down? No, it's forced at $1.25. So all of these large dairy farmers, now initially the law was created to try and not help them, right? So the large dairy farmers were told if you have more than 100 head of cattle, you can't be a part of this process, right? Which then it cuts it down to just small farmers. That worked for about 6 months. Guess what the large farmers did? Amen, sister. They took their 600 head cattle farm and said, oh, let's create 6 sub-corporate companies that each have 100 head of cattle, and they're now small farms that are operated quote-unquote independently, but they're a subcontracting member of my overall conglomerate, and yes, they can partake in the program. And so all these large farmers, it took them 6 months to figure out the legal ramifications. They started making more money. So large farms get rich. What do the large farms do, or what do they see as a way to get richer even still? They're making money by producing milk. They've run out of space. They don't have any more space. They don't have any more cattle. How are they going to get more cattle? Buy out the small farmer, right? I mean, come on. If you're making tons of money from your 600 head of cattle, you want to buy another 100 head of cattle. Your neighbor right over there is one of those quote-unquote save the small farmer farmers, and you're looking at him going, I can guarantee $1.25 a gallon for his 100 head of cattle. I can offer him, I offered him $1 million for his farm earlier. Now I'll offer him, say, $2.5 million. I mean, what's the small farmer doing when he sees that $2.5 million price tag?
He's thinking about it.
He's thinking. Is this $1.25 thing going to exist forever?
Maybe.
Probably not. So get out while the getting's good. Yeah, So what happened is large farmers buy the small farms, and what happens to the small farmers?
No more small farmers.
They disappeared anyways. Do you know how many dairy farms in Wisconsin exist that have less than 100 head of cattle anymore? About a dozen. There's a bunch of them, but most of them have been bought up by the larger farms and have become an independent contractor for a larger conglomerate. So, save the small farmers. What did it do?
Made the small farmers go away.
Made the small farmers go away. Now, granted, they got paid $2.5 million for their farm instead of only $1 million, so they got a better deal out of it. But if you have your Chapter 3 homework, save it for next time. We will start by going over that Chapter 3 homework at the beginning of class on Wednesday. Realize that there will be a test or a quiz on Chapter 3 on Wednesday. Basically, it's going to be me asking you to do 2 problems of supply and demand. Somebody hit the stop on that, would you? Hit the red button again. There it goes. Just hit the red button in the middle.